I'm about output, not hours. I just focus on things where I can move the needle versus doing things just because. Don't be short-sighted on a here and now sale. I mean, just always make sure you're thinking about that lifetime value, particularly if you're in a category with growth. There's a lot of people that say, oh, you got to be first. And I actually disagree. I think in most cases, you want to be second.
Welcome to Add to Cart, the podcast that Express delivers all you need to know in the fast-moving world of e-commerce. Every month, Nathan Bush from 12 High and an e-commerce industry expert will share the news, research and insights that you need to know to keep you at the top of your game. And of course, keep your customers adding to cart.
Hello and welcome to Add to Cart. My name is Nathan Bush, host of Add to Cart and e-commerce consultant at 12 High. My guest today is Carl Hartmann. Now, it's hard to put a label on Carl because of his varied interests and investments. He calls himself a serial entrepreneur, but I think he's a brilliant problem solver. Maybe it's one and the same thing. I first met Carl back in the days of Temando, which Carl co-founded and was CEO of. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Temando, it was one of the first, definitely in Australia, one of the first aggregators and intelligence for freight, which helped retailers deliver effectively. There's a few in the market now, but Temando was the first. You'll hear more about that today, as well as where Carl sees the future for fulfilment in Australia. Now, since the acquisition of Temando by Neopost back in 2017, Carl has gone on to be the co-founder of Lyres non-alcoholic spirits, as well as Shortlister, which is an intelligence platform to attract and retain talent. Now, with Lyres, Carl is back in the seat of a retailer, and his observations on this side of the fence are fascinating. Lyres has won multiple tasting awards and recently raised $16 million in capital to continue their expansion across 11 countries. So enough fluffing about. Thanks to our partners Shopify Plus and Signet, grab yourself a stiff drink or maybe a non-alcoholic drink and join me on the Lyres, Temando and Shortlister story with Carl Hartmann. Carl Hartmann, welcome to Add to Cart.
Thanks for having me, Nathan.
Pleasure. Now, Carl, we briefly knew each other through the Temando days, and we're going to get there. But if I look at what you've been doing since, you're co-founder and director at Lyres, you're co-founder and chair at Compono, adjunct Compono, sorry. I can't read my own writing. Adjunct professor of entrepreneurship and innovation at UQ, and you're sitting on a bunch of boards. Calling yourself a serial entrepreneur, which you no doubt are. What the hell does a typical day look like for you?
Well, if I'm really honest, my day actually starts with me checking the weather forecast because I'm quite blessed to live in Noosa, and the weather really will determine what my sporting activity of the day is going to be. So I was just actually thinking I should probably make a flow chart, as in, sun is shining, no wind, feel like being dry, cycle, feel like being wet, wakeboard or jetboard, winds up, kiteboarding it is. And I have been known to reshuffle some of my schedule around for a board meeting, which is actually going kite surfing in the afternoon instead because the wind picked up. But no, look, I think relevant to the story is post-Temando exit. It's one of these interesting things where kind of have this reflection period because to an extent, when you have a startup, it's your whole identity for a period of time. And, I was living in Silicon Valley and lived there for 4 years. It was a great professional experience, but it was one of those things where I did think about coming back to Australia. I think once you've spent some time abroad, you do appreciate the some of the finer things of Australia, which you perhaps took for granted. Simple things like free healthcare and clean beaches, and you'll never complain about Medicare again. That's for sure. And it was one of those things where, the original thought was about the whole Noosa angle was like, I remember coming here as a kid saying, I'm just going to live there. It's just such a nice place. And also living in San Francisco for years, my peak travel year, I actually did 230 days, and I've averaged 150 days of international travel a year for the last 10 years. So that's pretty insane. Much my whole professional career, I've just been like a serial traveler, right? And I can explain how that's led to more startups. But I remember just when I was living in San Francisco, I was just coming back, it was grey, it was cold. And I'm like, all I'm doing is traveling, coming back, and the weather's not great. Apart from this, you always get a pretty magic Indian summer, sort of October, which was quite nice. But, majority of the year, it's nice, but not amazing. And I'm like, well, next place I live, I'm going to live somewhere where when I'm at home, it feels like I'm on holiday, because I foresee myself traveling a lot for the foreseeable future, because that's just my pattern of existence. And I remember it was, I had kind of founded Compono first, because my biggest learning from the Temando arc was really about people, because, had grown that to a couple hundred people in size, multiple countries. And you get to this point of your career where it's like, the business is capitalized, it's stable, and then the bane of your existing just literally becomes people. It's either hiring the right people, just finding them. When you finally find them, you got to keep them. And there's definitely some gems trying to attract talent in Silicon Valley, where you're going up with head to head with literally companies that have a limited budget. And I remember interviewing some people and they're asking what's on the menu for the week. And I'm like, huh? And they're like, oh, I only work somewhere where there's a catered lunch. And you're like, holy shit, some people are entitled. And then, you reflect on, I guess, the story thus far. And I remember a couple of times I made some absolutely shocking hires that caused lots of damage to the business. On paper, looked amazing, get them in the business, and they're just not the right person. And then I had the complete inverse of that, where I had some people that literally you read the resume and you probably shouldn't even interview them. But you get them in, you upskill them, and they become your next superstar. So I remember just talking to other CEOs, just thinking, look, I just wish there was a platform that could tell me who I should hire, who I should fire, who I should train, who's going to be obsolete due to automation. Could be something simple as a chatbot, or in, a traditional manufacturing business, it could be like robotic automation. But, when you do have that situation, how do you upskill someone? And there was no God view to talent. And we did all the right things. We put in a HRS, like human resource platform. We had an applicant tracking system. But all they solved for was process, not intelligence. So basically teamed up with someone I went to uni with, and we cracked on. We built it. And, that's growing like a weed. COVID's been kind to it, in the sense that if you're doing any advertising for staff at the moment, you'll probably get somewhere between 5 and 10 times more candidates, and you need to, I guess, have some. Without a data-driven way of getting through that, you're just literally wasting time, because most HR people have so much dollar-productive stuff to do with their time. And then at the same time, once you've actually brought someone to business, then you've got to keep them there. And people now expect a whole career of learning and upskilling. I mean, take the e-com industry as a great example. It's like just, so something like Magento, you wrap your head around Magento 1 finally, well, then there's Magento 2, and then there's all the extensions, and then there's all the add-ons, and they've got the whole ecosystem. There's a lifelong learning program that comes with, being employed these days. It's not just, hey, you get a degree and that's it for the next 30 years. That was one where I felt passionate to solve that problem, because it was the source of frustration. And then I think with Lyres, it was a similar sort of journey. I should mention, I did try early retirement in Noosa. That lasted about 12 weeks. And it turns out I need to be busy to be happy. I'm just not the sort of person that can do. I'm all about work-life balance now. It's taken a while to get there, but I literally just have to keep busy, because it just fuels my fire.
How many hours a day would you be working now compared to when you were at the peak of busyness? Look,
probably not dissimilar, to tell you the truth. I'm about output, not hours. I just focus on things where I can move the needle versus doing things just because. I mean, that's probably the main difference to being a post-exit founder versus like when you're a first-time founder, you wear every hat and you'll do everything just because it needs to be done. Post-exit, you're like, it's almost like this self-reflection. You're like, I'm really good at this. So I'm good at raising capital, strategy, thinking what we should be doing next. Make me do a 30-page sort of plan and make sure Johnny Jim Jams has done item 26B. Look, there's just people that are way better suited for that in terms of both personality and skill set, right? So it's just, I think, just playing to your strengths, right? And just make sure every day you get up, you deliver value, whatever you're working on. So yeah, back to the Lyres thing. It was interesting. I was doing a lot of business in places like London and New York, and particularly London. I mean, every meeting after 4 o'clock, you just get given a beer in the hand. Like you just all the meetings just migrate to a pub, and whether you ask for a pint or not, there's just one that's given to you. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, I just can't drink every day. And then every so often I'd say, I'll just have a water, and then people would give you hard time saying, I thought you're Australian. What's wrong with you?
And originally from Queensland, too.
Yeah. You should be basically a functioning alcoholic by that definition. And it's just like, if you're constantly traveling, you're always at the front of the plane. To be honest, it was a combination of, you're constantly tired from travel, too much, just socialization, which comes with lots of meals and booze. And you'd end up, I think, putting on the weight, not feeling great. And I remember just thinking to myself, I just wish there was a drink that looked like a real drink, tasted like a real drink. No one actually knew I was having like the no or low alcohol option. And, obviously if you take out ethanol, you got a lot less calories, which is definitely good for the waistline. And at the time, even the original non-alcoholic beers on the market were just awful, right? Obviously, even they've come a long way. And it was one of these serendipitous things where I came back to Oz. I joined the board of a mate of mine's company, which is a full stack fulfillment business. And Mark, he was working on these the liquids that I guess now are Lyres. And I remember just thinking, I think the original plan was, to sort of spin up like a venture studio model and bring these things to market quicker than the big booze companies could. But I think my head was just like, holy bejesus, this is big, as in, let's not give away the IP, let's have a good crack at this ourselves. And we incorporated the company, did a quick lap around the world. And I think by the end of that first one, it's like distributors in 6 countries, forward order commitments. And, we knew we were on to a winner. And flash forward a year, it's now the world's most highly awarded non-alcoholic spirit brand. It's almost just non-contested in terms of, I think we're 50-something awards. I think a couple of people have some low single digits, but you're not quite the breadth we have. I mean, in fairness, we did launch with 13 varieties, which does help win the medal count when literally every product you have wins an award. They're all, it's like if people go, what's your favorite? It's like trying to ask your favorite children. And our amaretto the other day won 98 points in a spirit competition. I mean, that's the highest score any non-alcoholic spirit got. And remember last year was controversial. We actually thought we'd be cheeky and enter it in a double blind tasting against real booze, and we actually won a double gold. Wow. And then they had to go look at their rules to say, can they award a double gold in an alcoholic category? But there was nothing about minimum percentages. However, this year they've actually they've created dedicated non-alc categories because there's a bit of protest on that one, but hey-ho.
Some people will try and tell you that turning traditional plastic packaging tape into strong, eco-friendly paper tape is impossible. Well, not for our friends at Signet. In fact, it's a simple and cost-effective way to reduce your plastic usage and create a more sustainable packing offering, and it's available to everyone. Our partners at Signet have been helping leading retailers such as T2, Lush Cosmetics and Mecca reduce their plastic usage and create a more sustainable supply chain with their range of eco-friendly packaging products. To get started today, visit signet.net.au and find out more. You're a bourbon drinker, aren't you? That's your drink of choice. How does the Lyres bourbon compare to your bourbon of choice?
Look, my bourbon of choice is a Pappy Van Winkle, which is designed to have on the rocks without anything spoiling it, even just pure neat because it's so complex. But look, if you make an old-fashioned or any of the mixed drinks with our spirits, they are designed to act and taste and feel exactly like the reference spirit of its category. So ours is a lot in style to a Jack Daniel's, makes a great old-fashioned. Obviously, it's not designed to be drinking neat, and that's simply because when you take out ethanol has obviously a lot more molecular weight, and it obviously burns as well. So it's a different mouthfeel. We've got as close as possible with science, and it's won lots of awards, so it is very good. And to be honest, if you follow our recipes on the website to a T, most people find them indistinguishable, apart from the obvious burn of alcohol. But we have used different things like different chili and pepper compounds to try and sort of emulate it without it being overbearing.
Yeah, it's a fantastic idea, and I've heard you talk about people using Lyres as like a wedge drink between alcoholic drinks to keep their night in order and keep them on track. What are the other use cases you're hearing around why people go to Lyres rather than the traditional alcohols?
Look, I think it's just about giving people options. The whole thing with Lyres is about enabling mindful drinking. We have a bunch of demographic where they're not drinking, and that could be for religious reasons. It could be due to current circumstantial reasons, i.e. pregnant, breastfeeding, and so forth. They're the obvious ones. To be honest, I'd say our biggest demographic is people that are just trying to be healthy. And the interesting thing we saw through lockdown was very much around two types of, you had a simultaneous lockdown almost all around the world, which was unprecedented. And there seemed to be two groups of people, like Group A, which is, very much they just got into the day drinking. They might have been on some type of, wage subsidy scheme, hating on life a little bit. But then there was a massive, massive group being like a second group, which was saying, hey, this is a health crisis. I'm going to take the time to sort of, just focus on myself. And look, I personally fall into this category. I've gone from traveling, I think the minimum I've ever done in the last 10 years was 100 days. And I've got routine for the first time in my professional career. So it's literally, I was half joking at the start of this recording, saying, hey, check weather. But I literally do that. I find an hour a day just to start the day, particularly in that part when lockdown said you're only allowed to go outside for grocery shopping and exercise. And if someone does the grocery shopping, you're left with the only reason to leave the house legitimately was exercise. So I was like, oh, challenge accepted. And you start running every day, and turns out in your 30s, that's not something you should do every day. So then you start cross-training with the bike, and turns out that your ITB will get aggravated if you do day on, day off, intertwine cycling and that without stretching. So then you start to put cross-training in, and before you know it, you're like, oh, maybe I'll just do a triathlon. I've never done one of them before. It just compounds, right? But it's interesting. There's so much data that's come out saying, what I found is actually what half of society basically did, where they all got on Strava. They started competing with their friends. I mean, I'd love to see Strava's user growth over the last 6 months. I think they would have had probably the best year ever. And then so many people are so goal driven. So they're like, okay, well, I might just start training for whether it's a triathlon or people start feeling good about their health. And then I think the macro effect here is you make a lot of progress, you start to feel better. So you start to question your relationship with alcohol. Like, do I need to drink every day, or do I start to do wedge drinks? And, in my case, I always love to be social, but, midweek, if you're training early in the morning, you may not want to have alcohol and be hungover, because then your probability of training just decreased a lot. If you are going out, like living on the Sunshine Coast, you drive everywhere, right? So that limits to how much you can consume. But I mean, take for example, we've got an Aperol equivalent, which is called Italian Spritz. You can either mix that with a non-alcoholic Prosecco or a real Prosecco. The real Prosecco brings the ABV down from 22.5% to 4.5%. So based on the content of the drink, you've got something that's not even half a standard drink, where the original recipe is 2.2. 2.2, you have one, you can't drive home, right? Mm-hmm. At 0.5, I mean, as a guy, you could literally drink 4 of them an hour and still drive home, and then probably 2 every subsequent hour. So you can either use that in a wedge drink format and sort of prolong, say, a social outing, or you might just say, hey, I'll have the non-alc version, and hey, you can drink unlimited of those and stay out as long as you like. So what we found has been a really interesting sort of use case that's popped up is, say, restaurants that are doing lunch trade. They're getting people up from buying a sparkling water to maybe 2 or 3 cocktails. And it might not sound like much, but that could actually translate to a 30 to 40% revenue increase, which particularly at the moment when their businesses have been so negatively affected through lockdowns and COVID, and if we give them a boost, I mean, the data shows for itself, right? And I guess that's probably what's made Lyres differentiated. Effectively, a lot of the early movers in the space were all craft and new flavors, which you kind of have to be an expert mixologist to really recreate the flavors and drinks people know and love. Whereas with us, the whole idea was just to make it as easy for the bartender as reaching for a different model. So like they all know how to make the top 50 SKUs off the top of their head, right? So we're talking espresso martinis and Negronis and so forth. If all they have to do is like, okay, if I'm making a non-alcoholic Negroni, I use the Lyres London Dry, I use the Aperitif Rosso, and I use the Italian Orange, it's 1 for 1. Or they might do low proof and they might use their house gin and Alto aperitifs, and they bring the alcohol content down to make it a more sustainable, is probably the right word, drink. So I think because the cost to serve and the speed to serve, which are really important things in the on-trade, are basically the same. The adoption rate for our product has just been, chalk and cheese compared to pretty much everything in it. And I mean, the measurements, we've gotten so precise. If the recipe calls for 30 mil, ours will be 30 mil. Some of the other alternatives in the category are like 50 or 60. So both the cost to serve gets higher because they're a similar price point to us, if not more expensive if they're craft, but it throws all the recipes out and the bartenders get frustrated. And then I think just to build on this, what we saw through lockdown was the home bartender explosion. So everyone's at home. They're somewhat, I don't want to say bored. I mean, let's just say people had more time on their hand with commuting coming back. So they're like, oh, I've never made a cocktail before. So we saw a lot of the early data, and we started to, all our brand ambassadors who we paid to go to bars and restaurants, we just pivoted them all to do free Zoom masterclasses. And I mean, it's probably the best thing we could have done from an e-com perspective. So even if you bought a $45 bottle, we would give you a free Zoom masterclass. And, we found we were educating people about the category, where they bought one bottle. Next thing you know, they're buying a whole case of different variants, and they're saying, what else can we make? And we've really invested into our community. And I think that's, we have been fortunate that we were well resourced and we could do that. But like, if you think of this from an LTV perspective, sure, I mean, your first sale might be negative if you add up what the cost is in terms of people's time, but we can see in terms of repurchase and loyalty, and we can calculate an ever growing LTV. And we're like, wow, this just explodes the lifetime value of the customer. And I think, that's definitely a lesson I'd love to share to everyone is, don't be short-sighted on a here and now sale. I mean, just always make sure you're thinking about that lifetime value, particularly if you're in a category with growth, because if you can become the category captain, this is something which may change their trend forever, right?
Because that was going to be my next question to you is, you guys were fairly early on the no or the low alcohol trend. What was the launch strategy there? Was it to get bars and clubs using Lyres as their preferred no alcohol spirit, or was it to get customers to ask for Lyres specifically?
Pre or post lockdown, because
pre. Let's go back to the start.
So I'd say yes. I mean, we're actually not the first. There was obviously some early movers in the category, like Seedlip and Cedars, both back by Diageo and Pernod Ricard, respectively. But I'd say we're the first to do this at serious scale, and it took us a year. Obviously, we've been venture backed, which has allowed us to do it, but we're now the most widely available in terms of number of countries. Current count's 30, but literally check back every month because we just keep opening more. Even in the middle of a pandemic, we were fortunate that we did a lot of travel pre-borders shutting, so we'd already built a lot of these relationships. I think, and we've into the last 12 months, we're up to 11 e-com countries, and we've got a few more to go by the end of the year. So, hopefully this time next year, it'll be about double in both sort of distribution count and e-com count. And we have to actually do individual domestic sites and domestic fulfillment, because cross-border for us is actually quite difficult because of regulation. So you've got things like the FDA or the TGA. You've got all these different things when you're in the food category that we have to comply. And it could be something as simple as the liquid's the same, but it needs a different label. In some cases, like the Middle East and China, it requires reformulation. Like we're talking minor little tweaks.
Yeah. Given your background in logistics and fulfillment, was there anything that surprised you when you got into Lyres?
Oh, look, I think anyone that's ever had to deal with the FDA and the US, I mean, yeah, that's an experience. Like
so you're classified as food, not alcohol, obviously.
That's right. Yeah. So basically, if you're over 0.05%, you go through all the alcohol control measures. If you're under, you basically are in the food category. And it's just some of these regulations were written like 80 years ago, right? It's just the way things are. We're going back to prohibition level rules. So anyways, you just got to comply with standards and labels and measures. And, in some cases, it's like Canada, it must be in English and French. Otherwise, it's non-compliant. So anyhow.
All right. I thought if there was anyone who would have had it nailed, it would have been you.
Oh, look, we were quick to, I guess, spin up lots of 3PLs and the right model. And we know the right strategy to put in terms of make optimal conversions. I mean, we get a head start there. But not with that. I think it's the first time being on the other side of the fence as a retailer, right? Which it's a little bit more complicated than a t-shirt, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think the original strategy was, sign a distributor per country, focus on bars and restaurants, which obviously in the sector is called the on-trade. Then you do sort of off-trade retail, and eventually you do B2C to build a longer a long relationship with your brand. But obviously then the world changed, and we were very fortunate that we had a very robust e-com strategy from day one. And then when we got a bit scary there for a while, where our primary revenue stream just kind of got paused. So we had to just pivot and put a lot of energy into e-commerce, and we fast-tracked all the launching of our sites. And we went deep with Amazon. One of a handful of brands, Amazon's taking global into all countries through their Launchpad program, which we definitely recommend for listeners. And sometimes it's just a simple thing like getting set up on the UK with all the know your customer stuff is a pain, and it's painful. And being able to talk to someone like Amazon is worth its weight in gold, because you've probably just taken a 6-month onboarding into like a month, right?
Yep. Can you give us a little bit more detail around what that Amazon Launchpad looks like and how you partnered with Amazon?
Yeah, so Amazon Launchpad's a program that so obviously Amazon has more SKUs than I ever knew even existed. And obviously, to get cut through there, Launchpad's a program to help, I think, highlight some of the new SKUs. So and they do lots of different things. It's from having a dedicated new portal site, which actually gets some pretty high traffic, particularly in the US, where it's fairly well established. So people literally just go onto Launchpad and go, I want to look at new stuff, right? It's helping create new categories within the search taxonomy, so your products are found. It's EDMs, it's events, PR, all sorts of stuff.
Gotcha.
So ultimately, Amazon wants to have more unique SKUs than anyone. That's why probably the program exists. But I guess the added value for you as a merchant is helping get that cut through. And in our case, we launched on Amazon before we had our own site ready, because our own site took time. And Amazon, we just had to deliver some pallets of stock into FBA and let the Amazon machine do the rest, right?
Yeah. Was that also a testing ground for what markets and what products are really going to shift quickly online, or you kind of knew that already?
I think we had a pretty good understanding and research. It probably just helps highlight that. And we keep getting surprised, actually, because we think we understand the market, and then all of a sudden people latch on to one particular SKU. For example, we found out that a top Australian restaurant's using our absinthe in a new cocktail, and absinthe isn't exactly the number one best-selling variant in the world in terms of the spirits category.
It's not your Tuesday night drink, is it?
Not your Tuesday night drink, no. But again, you start to see some of these knock-on effects where you might have, say, a venue of influence. They do something amazing, and then people go, "What a cool idea!" and they can spread like wildfire. Even some of the Asian markets, that SKU is really popular, where it's obvious you go into markets like the US, and our bourbons is a bestseller. We go into the UK, our gin's a bestseller. You've got your obvious sort of cliches. In Australia, it's anything that makes a nice, summery, refreshing drink, particularly. So, rums, gin, bourbon, all the spritzes sell really well. Australia's a bit of a mixed bag, and of course, we've got the espresso martini, which is the most popular cocktail SKU in Australia. Would you believe?
There you go. What I love about Lyres is obviously the product stands on its own 2 feet based on all the awards that you won and the success that you're having. But the branding of it's phenomenal as well. Like every time you look at a bottle or look at the website, it just draws you in. There's so much to look at and explore. Did the marketing come first? Did the product come first? How did that come about?
Yeah, so the liquids came first, and then it's like, okay, we've got to come up with a brand. Basically, we took inspiration from the Australian lyrebird. So a big part of our brand identity is being as close to the original base spirit or the spirit of origin as possible. Mark and I are both Australian, so we're like, okay, we need a nice Australian connection, because Australia, when it comes to products, particularly food and beverage, has a really, really good reputation globally. Particularly if you're exporting, we manufacture here, and we export to Asia. If it's perceived as a premium Australian product, that's the promised land, right? So we said, all right, well, lyrebird, it's nature's ultimate mimic. So that the lyrebird can hear anything from Mozart to a chainsaw and recreate the sound. And we're like, that's where we're going. I mean, with playing on this whole mimicry angle. So then we thought, well, a lot of the terms, so take gin, for example, that's a protective term. So we can't actually use gin on the bottle because, you know, we're not a gin, right? Because gin has to be made to a very specific, you know, standard. Sure. And, or bourbon. I mean, bourbon, you know, you must use X Kentucky mash or whatever it is. So that's you need to come from a region, right? Gotcha. So and so on and so forth. So and we've always played by the books. We do see some emerging businesses, you know, just saying, "Oh, we're a gin alternative." I'm like, you're going to get sued. The question is just how long will until someone sort of throws a rock. Because don't forget, you're in a category with hundreds of billion-dollar sized spirits companies that won't sort of be very forgiving if they feel that there's erosion of their core, their core assets, right? So we figured, okay, so how do we start to tell the story? Well, we got to find the spirit animal, as in, so we're playing on the word spirit and the spirit of origin. So, for example, the London Dry, which is our gin, it's got a pigeon because obviously pigeon is the most popular creature in London.
So it's kind of that connection without actually having to say the word. The visuals and the
imagery,
imagery kind of does the connection for you. It's fantastic. Yeah. And did you guys put that sequence together yourselves, that thinking, or was it did you give a brief to an ad agency to do?
Yeah, so we were quite fortunate that I guess where Lyres was incubated came out of BrandLink, and we've got the award-winning Kinetic agency as part of that stack. So it was very much done. So BrandLink is a group that basically helps all FMCG customers go to market with everything from logistics to brand to launch strategy. So we had that capability in-house, and then obviously Lyres was, I guess, birthed out of that stack. So we did have an army of people behind us on day one that helped with that. But the guys at Kinetic did a brilliant job, and I mean they're all part of the Lyres family.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, you can see all the building blocks coming together to create this beautiful product, right? So it's a fantastic story. Yeah. I want to take us back, if it's okay with you, to Temando, because a lot of our e-commerce listeners would have either worked with Temando or even worked with yourself back in Temando days. So Temando started up in 2009, as I understand. Give us a bit of insight on how you came up with the Temando vision. And it really was the early days of e-commerce then, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you start to think of early days of e-com. There's like myself, Paul Greenberg, a few other of the old of the OGs. But yeah, so look, I came up with that actually when I was in university. The irony is, so Marco did Lyres we actually both worked at JB Hi-Fi in our university days, and you start to look at how intertwined fate must be. That all these threads somehow form together over decades. Butterfly effect or something like that. But back then, if you think back 20 years ago now and plasma TVs were all the rage, what would happen is people would come into the store and say, look, how much to get this thing shipped? And what would happen is we would go consult with the person in the storeroom. They'd have a magic piece of paper on a wall, and it would say $50 or $100, whatever it is. And everyone was commissioned back then, right? So basically the way that worked is at the end of every week you had to submit your commission, and it worked both positively and negatively. So if you made money for the company, there was effectively a rev share. If you didn't, you had to deduct it from your commission because you sold something under the sell. So long story short with that is pretty much every time we tried to charge for delivery, we got it wrong. And I was like, wow, there must be a better way for this. It was just something that was in the back of my head. And then after sort of uni, I worked in the early days of News Corp, looked after the retail portfolio, saw all these merchants going online. And basically what they were doing was just copying the American strategy, putting free shipping, hoping for the best, and then freaking the hell out when their first order is from like Thursday Island or regional WA, and they're just taking a bath. In some cases, it's not just negative margin. It's like the shipping cost is more than the product's even worth, right? Yep. So I was like, oh, this is a pain. And then sort of went from there. It was early days of Domain, sort of really learnt firsthand how to build something to market there, just watching Domain sort of be a challenger to realestate.com and execute a really tight product strategy. And I think they've probably innovated far more at a product level than some of the incumbents there, and just chipped away as a challenger. So sometimes there's a lot of people who say, oh, you got to be first. And I actually disagree. I think in most cases, you want to be second because you mentioned uni before. I give a lecture a couple of times a year at UQ around entrepreneurship. And obviously the average age of students now, we probably start to show our age, but I throw up the example of Alta Vista and I get this puzzled look. I'm like, has anyone ever heard of this? And they're just like, no idea. I'm like, well, this was the first search engine. When I had my dial-up internet connection and you try to make a modem sound and they've never heard what a modem sounds like.
And you just hear someone come out and say, okay, boomer.
Yeah. Like not quite a boomer, but you'd probably be old enough to remember Alta Vista, right? It was sort of like Russian roulette. You type something in and you just don't know what you're going to get. Sometimes it's an adult site, sometimes it's something with cats, sometimes it's actually the thing you're looking for. It was kind of the fun of the internet, and I think that actually spawned the simpler time. The I'm feeling lucky button on Google that existed for a while, right? But interestingly enough, sort of Alta Vista, then there was Yahoo, then there was Google, really. And then everyone thought Google was crazy. It's like, search engines already exist. They just did it so much better because they had, I think, the prior art to draw from and I guess a way to sort of refine, the model. And I also give the example of, I showed the most popular phone when I was in university, which was the Nokia 8310, the one with the blue screen. Yeah. Because it was the first one that had a blue screen, and anyone that was cool had the blue screen. And then you show up the iPhone example and say, you would have never have thought in 20 years ago when Nokia had 75% market share that they would be everyone just thought they were untouchable, one of the best tech stocks in the world. Then Apple just basically ate everything. All because what started with the iPod that metamorphosized into the iPhone. And then ultimately it was so much more than a device. It actually changed the way that we interact with information, right? I remember pub chat, in university, you could just make up stories. You can't do that anymore because someone will call bullshit, or they'll ask Siri, or, they'll basically just get on Wikipedia. I mean, all the world's information is now truly democratized.
You can still run for US president, though.
You just use the fake news.
That's right, exactly.
If it doesn't fit your narrative. No, that's fake news.
Think Shopify Plus is just for simple retailers? Well, let me tell you, JB Hi-Fi is no simple business. But when their old site crashed for 2 hours during Black Friday, doing nothing was simply not an option. Shopify Plus was selected as their e-commerce partner to help facilitate the fast-growing $5 billion retailer. However, with over 200 dispatch locations, a reliance on a web of APIs, and the ability to handle triple growth, it wasn't an out-of-the-box implementation. But the results spoke for themselves. JB Hi-Fi cruised through a record Black Friday and Cyber Monday in 2019 without a hitch, have reduced average page load time by 15%, and were even able to redeploy 3 techies whose job it was just to watch the servers to make sure it didn't go down. JB Hi-Fi and Shopify Plus, not just smashing prices, but smashing e-commerce. To read more of JB Hi-Fi's story and see other case studies, visit the customer section on shopify.com.au/plus. I also remember too, in those early days, one of the biggest things was on the other side is that couriers basically just inherited all this e-commerce volume overnight. When they were originally, they were just taking parcels from businesses to businesses, right? They weren't set up for e-commerce.
Well, I think you nail it there, right? So in the early Temando days, it's like we would go speak to the carriers about e-commerce. They didn't care. They're like, it's not even 1% of the market. No. And then in fact, when we first started, we had to hold the rates with the carriers because that's the only way that we could trade with them because they didn't have APIs or anything. So in many cases, we had to educate the world's couriers of, okay, e-commerce is a thing. You need to have developer documentation and APIs. And hey, if you can't do that, we'll be a partner. We'll do some of the heavy lifting for you. And, just drove the whole industry forward. So obviously the deal we did in 2015, that was the beginning of the exit, and then that wrapped up 2017. And, like I can say openly, like that definitely would have paved the way for so many people that came after. Like, in the Australian example, it's the folks like Sendle and Ship It, where sort of Sendle did the, Temando Model 1, which was the whole selling of rates, making it sort of aggregated for SMEs, and to sort of double down on the carrier thing. And then Ship It obviously did the second Temando model. So I think it was one of those things with Neopost buying it. The CEO at the time had a big vision for shipping strategy. Then he retired. A new CEO came in and wanted to go back to basics. So definitely this is not the only time that this will ever happen within a business. It's I guess the best analogy to give is sometimes if you sell people a Ferrari, doesn't mean they know how to drive it, right? And can wrap it around a tree as they drive off the parking lot. And look, big companies change strategic direction whenever they have a change of leadership, and that is just something that happens. And I think, there's lots of eyes on Adobe with Magento right now to see where that will end up. Because I guess I've been through the industry long enough to watch Magento version 1, then Magento under eBay, and then now Magento under Adobe, and who knows where that goes.
We've still got things like, I think eMarties was recently bought by SAP, which SAP don't have a great history, but you never know what could happen out of it. Do you remember the day that you went, oh, this baby isn't mine anymore? And what were your feelings like around that? Was it joy? Was it sadness? Was it, because this is something you built from scratch?
It's a bittersweet. So I think when you do exit, it's like you just kind of hope someone, leans in the right way to give it its full potential. I think the hard part as an entrepreneur watching from the sidelines, you're just like, oh, I wouldn't have done that, or I would do this, or like you kind of want to almost jump back in. But I think from in my case, I had a sort of a 3-month period where I'm like, I'm just going to try doing nothing for a while, and then that concluded with me sort of investing in about a dozen companies and starting 2 myself. So yeah, that experiment was not successful. But I think it's your mind starts to, like, first you get this identity crisis, and then it's like, okay, what is the thing I want to solve next? Because I kind of was, part of the reason for exiting, I was sort of done with shipping. I kind of learned all I can, and you start to get a bit tired doing the same thing, and it just so happens it's like, all right, well, I guess helping people finding meaningful work and help probably the most important thing for companies around talent, because that's everything right now. Particularly, it's even just been exacerbated with COVID, because it's interesting seeing companies that hire well for culture right now are absolutely thriving because their whole company can work remote. Those that haven't and have a micromanagement culture or like this office hours 9 to 5, they're just not doing too well. And I think all of a sudden, new ways of building teams and managing teams and thinking about talent. I think that the whole, like, there's going to be some long-lasting macro trends that emerge post-COVID. Just as an example, the amount of people I've met in the last few months, just different senior executives from tech companies, other very successful entrepreneurs that are all on the Sunshine Coast now, because they're just like, well, I don't have to go to an office every day. The team wants to keep working remote. So there's been heaps of companies that have said, well, you can work remote forever, basically, because this is working, because they've done the right thing. So they're like, well, I'm going to leave the city and go live in Queensland where the weather is better and I get a lot more house for my dollar.
Yeah.
So,
I think we just lost all our Melbourne listeners right then.
Oh, well, look, we feel so. Look, in these situations, someone always gets the short straw. But I can tell you I know a lot of Melbourne people that have either rented or bought a house and said, yeah, I'm relocating.
Yeah.
Because, hey, if you're going to be stuck at home, do a 2-week quarantine and go live in Queensland for 6 months. I've probably actually caught up with more Melbourne friends in Queensland in the last 6 months. Because if your circumstances permitted it, particularly if you're homeschooling your kids, nothing says you have to stay there. Because, the borders are still open if you're willing to quarantine. It's just you've got to have, I guess, the ability to do that.
Yep.
But look, my neighbour up here actually normally splits his time between Noosa and Melbourne. He hasn't made it up, obviously, riding it out with the family. But I was surprised he just didn't do the 2-week quarantine because he would normally spend the winters up here. But there's a lot of people in Melbourne that actually have their holiday house up here, whether they buy or rent. So I do think you're going to see some long-lasting demographics shifts, because it used to be that cities attracted talent because that's where the cluster of employment is. The whole game changes if you can work remote. And it hasn't been just, say the Sunshine Coast. It's been, from some of the empirical real estate data I've seen, it's like north and south coast of Sydney. It's places like, Ballarat, Mornington Peninsula in Melbourne, because obviously Melbourne had a hard lockdown, but, I know some folks that were fortunate enough to have beach houses, and that's exactly, they just changed their driver's license and said, I no longer live in Melbourne.
Yeah, exactly.
And people that just went and bought one, if not, right?
Yeah. And I think it's been long enough now that people go, oh, this isn't a fad. Like, we've kind of settled into our ways of working. And sure, there might be a little bit of a rebalance at some point. Do you think also we're going to see businesses relocating out of those major cities to follow their employees?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing that says you have to pay all these massive city-based rents, right? I jokingly said a while ago, it's like with Compono, because we're most of the staff in Brisbane, we've got contingent in Sydney, but I've said, why don't we just all go to the Sunshine Coast? Because normally you've got 2 flights a day to Sydney, it's all you need. You can do day trips. And then I jokingly said it the other day, and like, oh, could we? I'm like, well, we got leases.
Yeah.
But look, I would not be surprised. And the interesting thing is, because I think the thing that I still think is important about offices is, like, I definitely execute better when I am by myself and no one talks to me, because I get through more stuff. But you can't replace the collaboration that happens by bringing everyone to an office. So still, I've gone to the office as we've been able to through this whole period, because I like to get on a whiteboard and draw and have everyone in the room. And if you're doing things like, I don't know, strategy or financial modeling or things that require multiple perspectives, I think doing that over Zoom and stuff like that, it's just too hard. I personally get drained after 45 minutes. Whereas, give me a whiteboard and some pens and we can be there 3 hours.
Yes.
Like if as long as there's coffee,
and non-alcoholic spirits.
I don't know. If you're doing financial modeling, you might need some real booze at the end of that.
That's right. We've got to wrap up, but one question that I was really keen to hear from you is that it feels like we're at a bit of a crossroads with shipping at the moment. We've got a lot of people turning to ship from stores, 3PL, we've got Amazon, people owning their own warehouses, a lot of curbside stuff. You're not even an outsider anymore. You're a retailer. So what do you...
A real retailer.
What do you think about the big transitions that people need to make around setting up their fulfillment models right now?
Look, I'll put my Lyres hat on here. The biggest challenge at the moment is supply chain disruption. I think the first question you have to ask yourself is, where does your product come from? So, case in point, right now, there's been some strikes and stuff in Sydney ports. There's retailers with containers of stock that are just sitting there waiting to be open, and there's this knock-on effect for inventory, right? I think for so long the world's operated on just in time, because you can just fly, like worst case, just eat a bit of margin, air freight it, 2 days, happy days, right? That doesn't exist anymore, because with restricted borders and flight volume being at 20% of what it was a couple of years ago, air freight is expensive. There's no capacity. It is like people are overbidding people because there are things that are more essential, things like PPE equipment and foodstuffs and stuff that we need, for the world to keep spinning. So discretionary goods can get bumped unless you're prepared to eat a lot of margin, which may actually be just commercially not viable, right? So consequently, all that volume then flows onto sea, and then sea's at capacity. So you've got to think about like triple redundancy in your supply chain right now. So our original plan was, we'll manufacture everything in Australia and we'll just, we'll air freight it where we need to, and we'll sea freight where we have the time. And then it's like, just getting enough glass bottles, that's a challenge. Just because, we have a problem at the moment. We just like, no matter how much we make, we sell. So it's just like, we literally just can't keep up with demand, which is a good problem to have.
I was about to say, some people don't call that a problem.
No, but it's a challenge, right? Because you've got to make sure that you've got ample stock of raw ingredients and bottles, and then you've got to have freight capacity, and there's all these moving parts. So like, if you don't have someone on that, pretty much full time owning that, it's going to be a challenge. In our case, we're thinking about how do we serialize this and, manufacture in multiple points, which we're doing now. We're doing in both Europe and North America. So we've got 3 points of presence, because then you start to like shorten your overall procurement chain, because if everything has to come to one central point and then go out to the rest of the world, well, if you can stockpile, different stuff, if you do have border restrictions or port strikes, like the world keeps spinning. So So it's almost like I'd say you have to look at supply chains now like you would your tech infrastructure, where, if data center 1 goes down, data center 2 is there to catch.
It's a fantastic analogy. I love it. And I love that term, the triple redundancies there for what you're looking at. I saw that.
Yeah, double's not enough anymore.
No, double's not enough. Well, I saw for the first time Apple have started doing ship from store, which they've never done before. So even in the US, where ship from store hasn't traditionally been a huge focus, even that's starting to come into play as one of the redundancies there, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, well, you can understand. I mean, Apple, I actually went to an Apple store the other day. I had to get they've got these new single sort of bands. So I kiteboard, and every so often I have a stack and I lose the Apple Watch in the water, and I'm like, oh, lucky the thing's got a heart rate thing that flashes green. You can find it relatively easy. But they've got these new bands that don't fall off when you do high intensity sports. I was like, cool. But to get in, you got your temperature check, and then you got to put your mask on, and then they've got to sanitize, and there's this whole like check-in procedure to go to the store. I can get why they're doing that, because it's like, it's not, I mean, look, they're being responsible and they're complying with policy, but I found it interesting. I did this at the Chermside store. I'm like, all right, I'm in a state with no community transmission, with shut borders. Like, so literally, I'd say, I mean, there's always a risk, but the risk has to be so close to zero. But they're like, hey, it's just a global sort of carte blanche policy they've done. So interestingly enough, obviously, if they think of the flip side of that, not everyone's going to want to go through that customer experience. So if they can ship from store, well, then that starts to enable a customer satisfaction level that previously, because their whole store has been set up as destinations. Their stores exist to bring people in, but they have to almost become their anti-trend with the current sort of circumstances of the world, right?
Yep, absolutely. There is so much more I'd love to talk to you about, but we have to wrap up there. Carl, where is the best way that people can learn more? Obviously, we can visit the Lyres site, visit Shortlister. Where can they contact you?
Probably LinkedIn's always pretty good.
LinkedIn, nice. All right. Good stuff. And I think we've got a special offer from Lyres for the first time orders. We have 20% off your first order. We'll put all the details in the email and on our social. So thank you very much for that. We're keen on trying that. Carl Hartmann, thank you very much for joining us on Add to Cart.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, listening back on that episode, there were so many rabbit holes that I wanted to go down with Carl. 50 minutes just wasn't long enough to cover all the things that I wanted to talk about across shipping, the future of work, and a little topic close to my heart in drinking. But one thing that really resonated with me, from an e-commerce view at least, was Carl's triple redundancy approach to fulfillment. His analogy around web server redundancy for fulfillment was spot on. Now, as COVID's shown us, inventory management and supply chain reliability can be upturned at any time. It's crucial that you don't put all your eggs in one basket. Now, this doesn't mean you have to offer warehouse plus 3PL plus ship from store. That'll get really expensive and really old really quickly. But it is important that you have options. So while you may fulfill primarily from your own warehouse today, what happens if borders close again? What happens if you have a surge of demand? What happens if your biggest fulfillment partner goes out of business? It's so important that you have backup options that are clear and ready to roll out should the need arise. Now, if the Lyres story really caught your attention, or you just want to justify drinking absinthe on a Tuesday, head over to addtocart.com.au. We have a really special 20% off coupon for you in the show post. If you're looking for more e-commerce news, case studies, and research, sign up to 12 High's High 5 newsletter. Every week, I read all the e-commerce news and send you 5 things which I've found which will help grow your business. Visit 12high.com.au/high5, HIGH 5, to sign up for free. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep adding to cart.